On the morning of January 17, 1912, 3 men walked into the Wind River Range of Wyoming, carrying 72 hours of provisions for a journey they believed would take 48. None of them returned. Their names appear in the ledger of the Lander Hotel with remarkable clarity. Thomas Ashford, age 34, mining consultant from Denver. His signature is confident, each letter cleanly formed. Below it, Howard Penfield, 29, photographer, address listed simply as itinerant. The third name is almost illegible. William Sayre, 41, whose occupation the desk clerk recorded as Investor, Chicago. What we know of their departure comes from multiple sources that align with unsettling consistency. The stable owner, Marcus Thibault, remembered Ashford examining the horses with what he called city hands. The proprietor of Kendrick's General Supply, Ada Kendrick, kept meticulous records. Her invoice, preserved in the county historical collection, shows they purchased 3 bedrolls, a single canvas tarp, 2 boxes of matches, salted pork, hardtack, coffee, and a storm lantern with 1 quart of kerosene. No rope, no additional blankets beyond what they wore. The weather on January 16th had been deceptively mild. The temperature at noon reached 38 degrees, warm enough that several residents later recalled seeing men in shirt sleeves outside the post office. This detail matters because it shaped everything that followed. Ashford had come to Lander 3 weeks earlier. His correspondence filed with the Wyoming State Geological Survey indicates he was evaluating copper deposits in the northern tributaries of the Popo-Aggie River. The survey maps he requested still exist. Someone, presumably Ashford, marked a route in pencil along the eastern ridge, a path that would take them above the tree line and into exposed country where wind could erase a trail in 20 minutes. Penfield had joined him 4 days before the departure. A single surviving photograph shows him standing beside a pack mule in front of the hotel, squinting into winter light. He wears a wool coat too thin for the elevation. In his left hand, barely visible, he holds what appears to be a tripod case. He had told the hotel clerk he intended to document the American wilderness in winter. His camera equipment, heavy and bulky, would be found later. Sayre arrived on the 14th. The train manifest from Rock Springs lists him among 11 passengers. The conductor remembered him because he carried no luggage except a leather satchel and asked repeatedly about stagecoach schedules to Lander. He seemed, the conductor later said, like a man in a hurry to catch up to something already in motion. Why these 3 men came together remains partially obscured. Ashford's letters mention hiring a photographer to document mineral formations for potential investors. Sayre's involvement is less clear, though a telegram sent from Chicago to the Lander post office on January 10th reads, "Arriving Thursday. Prepared to evaluate site. Confirm arrangements." The message was signed W.S. They met with a local guide on the evening of January 15th. His name was Joseph Crane, 63 years old, a man who had worked as a trapper before the beaver trade collapsed and who now lived in a cabin 7 miles north of town. Crane kept no diary, but his testimony was recorded by Sheriff Roland Mackey during the subsequent search. Crane told them the route they proposed was feasible in summer. In January, he said, it was not. He used the word suicide in his statement. The men thanked him for his opinion. Ashford paid him $2 for his time. Then they told him they would proceed anyway. The decision was made in the small dining room of the Lander Hotel over coffee that had gone cold. Ada Kendrick, who brought them a second pot around 8 o'clock that evening, heard Ashford say, "We've come too far to wait for weather." She remembered the phrase precisely because she thought it was a strange way to describe a journey that had not yet begun. The next morning, they loaded the horses in pale dawn light and rode north. To understand what followed, one must first understand what Lander was in January of 1912. The town had incorporated only 17 years earlier. Its population hovered near 600, though that number swelled seasonally when sheep herders brought their flocks down from summer pastures. The buildings along Main Street were frame construction, painted white or left bare to weather gray. Wooden sidewalks kept boots clear of the mud that formed when snowmelt mixed with the clay soil. The town existed because of proximity to the reservation boundary, to the stage route, to the railroad spur that terminated in Rock Springs. Men came through Landa because it was the last place to resupply before entering country that offered nothing. Prospectors, surveyors, hunters, men with vague plans and poor maps. Most of them left with what they came for. Some did not leave at all. Mining speculation was common in that period. The copper boom in Montana had made fortunes and ruined just as many. Wyoming seemed poised to follow. Geological surveys conducted between 1908 and 1911 identified promising formations throughout the Wind River Range. What the surveys did not emphasize, or perhaps could not predict, was how inaccessible those formations remained for half the year. Ashford's letters to his firm in Denver reveal a man who understood geology but misjudged logistics. In a letter dated December 30, 1911, he wrote, "The formations match the butte profiles. If the assays confirm, we are looking at a significant deposit. I will need to verify the site personally before snow closes the high country," he added, almost as an afterthought. Weather permitting. Weather did not permit, but by the time Ashford reached Landa, he had already spent his firm's money on travel, lodging, and assay equipment. Turning back would mean returning empty-handed. The pressure to produce results appears repeatedly in his correspondence. In a telegram to his employer sent January 12th, he wrote, "Samples promising, will secure photographic evidence and return by month's end." Penfield's motivations were harder to document. He left behind almost nothing in writing. The hotel clerk recalled that he spoke often of illustrated magazines in New York and Chicago, of editors who wanted images no one else had captured, winter mountains, frozen waterfalls, the kind of photographs that could establish a reputation. In 1912, photography required preparation. Glass plates, chemical baths, tripods sturdy enough to hold a view camera in wind. Penfield carried all of it. The weight alone would have been considerable. Add that to provisions, bedrolls, and the mining tools Ashford needed, and the horses were loaded beyond what was prudent. Joseph Crane's warning had been specific. He told them that the high route required 5 days minimum, even in good conditions. He pointed out that their provisions covered 3 days, perhaps 4 if rationed. He explained that January storms in the Wind River Range could arrive with no warning and last 72 hours. He showed them his own hands. The fingers on his left hand shortened from frostbite he suffered in a blizzard in 1889. He said, "The snow doesn't kill you. The cold after the snow kills you." Ashford had responded by showing Crane the geological maps. He traced the route with his finger. "We follow the ridge," he said. "We stay above the drainages. 3 days to the deposit, 1 day for photographs and samples, 2 days back. 6 days total." Crane asked what they would do if a storm caught them on the exposed ridge. Ashford said they would descend into the timber and wait it out. Crane asked if they knew how to navigate in whiteout conditions. Ashford said they had compasses. The exchange, as Crane recalled it, was polite. No voices were raised. Ashford was not arrogant, only confident. He believed preparation could substitute for experience. It was a common belief among men who came from places where systems worked and infrastructure existed. The wilderness, they assumed, operated according to similar principles. Plan well, execute carefully, and outcomes would align with expectations. On the morning of their departure, the sky was cloudless. The temperature at sunrise was 22 degrees, cold, but not severely so. A light wind moved from the south. By the standards of a Wyoming January, it was a fine day to begin a journey. Several people saw them leave. The stable owner watched them ride north on the wagon road that led toward the reservation boundary. A rancher named Albert Moss, whose property lay 3 miles outside town, saw them pass around mid-morning. He waved. Ashford waved back. That was the last confirmed sighting by anyone not part of their group. The historian reviewing these events more than a century later is left with a troubling question. At what point did confidence become irrecoverable error? When they declined Crane's advice? When they purchased insufficient supplies? When they set out despite the calendar? Or was it earlier still, when Ashford decided a January expedition was feasible, When Penfield believed a camera could survive what a man might not. When Sayre chose to invest money in a venture led by someone he had never met. The record suggests the decision was not a single moment, but a series of small commitments, each one narrowing the options that followed, until the only choice left was to continue forward into country that made no allowances for miscalculation. What happened in the days after they left Landa must be reconstructed from fragments. The first piece of evidence comes from a sheep herder named Tom Yellowtail, who was moving his flock to winter pasture in the foothills northwest of the Popo-Agi River. On January 18th, he saw 3 men and 3 horses moving along the eastern ridge at an elevation he estimated to be near 10,000 feet. He remembered the encounter because he thought it was unusual to see anyone that high so late in the season. He did not speak to them, they were too far away, but he watched them for several minutes before they disappeared into a stand of whitebark pine. The second fragment is a notation in Penfield's notebook, which was recovered later. The handwriting is hurried, the pencil strokes faint. It reads, Jan 18, Ridge Camp, wind steady from NW. Ashford insists on early start tomorrow, concerned about horses. Below that, a single word. Cold. The third fragment is the weather record kept by the U.S. Signal Service observer in Landa, a clerk named Raymond Foley, who recorded temperature and conditions twice daily. His log for January 19th notes, morning temp 14 degrees, clouds building from west, barometer falling. By evening, temp 8 degrees, light snow beginning, wind increasing. By January 20th, the entry reads, blizzard conditions, visibility nil, temp 4 degrees. The storm that arrived on the 19th was not extraordinary by the standards of the region. It was simply winter behaving as winter does at high elevation. What made it catastrophic was timing. Somewhere on the ridge, on the morning of January 19th, Thomas Ashford made the choice that defined everything afterward. We know this because of a second notation in Penfield's notebook, written in a different hand, shakier, less controlled. The words are, A. refuses descent, says site is close, says storm will pass. The entry is not dated, but based on the position in the notebook and the condition of the page. Wrinkled as though it had gotten wet and then frozen, it was likely written on the 19th or early on the 20th. Reconstruction requires imagination disciplined by evidence. The scenario that best fits the facts is this. They woke on the morning of the 19th to a sky the color of pewter. The wind, which had been steady the day before, was now gusting hard enough to make the pines creak. The temperature had dropped through the night. Their water, if they had not kept it close to their bodies, would have frozen solid. Penfield, who had likely suffered through the coldest night of his life, would have urged retreat. The light was poor for photography. The horses were struggling. The storm signs were obvious. Sayre, the investor, would have agreed. He had no stake in reaching the site if conditions made documentation impossible. Returning to Landa, waiting for better weather, trying again in spring, all of this would have been reasonable. But Ashford had not come to be reasonable. He had come to confirm a copper deposit that might justify his employer's expenditure and salvage his own professional credibility. He had been on the ridge for 2 days. According to his maps, the site was close. Perhaps half a day's travel. To turn back now, so near the objective, would mean failure. In his mind, the calculation must have seemed sound. The storm might pass quickly. They could reach the site, gather samples, take a few photographs, and then descend before conditions worsened. Waiting meant losing time. Retreat meant losing everything. He convinced them, or perhaps he simply outvoted them. 3 men, 3 opinions, and the tiebreaker was ambition. They continued north. By midday, the snow had begun. Not heavily at first, just scattered flakes riding the wind. But the temperature continued to drop, and the wind continued to rise, and by afternoon, the snow was no longer scattered but constant, blowing horizontally across the ridge, erasing their tracks as quickly as they made them. This is where the account enters the realm of necessary speculation, grounded in what we know of human endurance and mountain weather. They would have realized their error by evening. The site, wherever it was, had not appeared. Visibility was reduced to a few dozen yards. The horses, already exhausted, were beginning to falter. The cold was no longer discomfort, but danger. Descending in a whiteout at night on unfamiliar terrain was not feasible. Their only option was to stop and wait. A tarp stretched between trees, bodies pressed together for warmth. The horses standing with their backs to the wind. The storm lantern burning through its quart of kerosene, then going dark. Hours passing in cold so severe that breathing hurt. At some point during that night, or perhaps the next day, when the storm showed no sign of abating, one of them must have understood that they were not going to leave the mountain. Penfield's final notebook entry, undated, reads, "Cannot feel hands. A. Unresponsive. Sayre, attempting fire." Below that, the handwriting degrades into illegible marks. The storm lasted 3 days. When it cleared on January 23rd, the temperature in Landa was 12 degrees below zero. On the ridge, exposed to wind, it would have been far colder. They had refused to turn back, and that sealed it. When the 3 men failed to return by January 25th, the hotel clerk notified Sheriff Mackey. Mackey was a practical man who had served as sheriff for 6 years and understood that winter searches in the Wind River Range were often recovery operations rather than rescues. He organized a search party of 8 men, including Joseph Crane, who agreed to guide them despite his earlier warnings. They departed on January 27th. The temperature was 5 degrees above zero. The sky was clear. Crane led them north along the same route Yellowtail had described. The snow on the ridge was waist-deep in places, sculpted by wind into formations that concealed the underlying ground. Progress was slow. They camped on the ridge the first night and continued the next morning. They found the horses on January 28th. All 3 animals were dead, frozen in place where they had stood. They were still laden with equipment. The packs had not been removed. One horse had its head lowered as though grazing, but there was no grass, only snow. The scene suggested the animals had been abandoned, left to die while the men moved on foot. Near the horses, partially buried, they found Ashford's geological maps and a leather satchel containing assay tools and ore samples. The samples, later analyzed, showed traces of copper, enough to be promising, not enough to justify the expedition. They found no bodies, no tent, no sign of a camp. Crane suggested they search the timber below the ridge, thinking the men might have descended to escape the wind. The search party split into pairs and combed the drainage for 2 days. They found nothing. On January 30th, with provisions running low and another storm threatening, Mackey ordered the party to return to Landa. He told the families, Ashford's wife in Denver, Penfield's sister in Ohio, Sayre's business partner in Chicago, that the men were missing and presumed dead. The frustration in the official record is palpable. Mackey's report filed with the county clerk on February 3rd includes this passage. The deceased made decisions inconsistent with survival. Their refusal to heed warnings from experienced guides, their inadequate provisions, and their determination to proceed despite worsening conditions constitute a sequence of errors that made rescue impossible. A second search was organized in late March after the snow had begun to melt. This party, led by a trapper named Samuel Holt, covered a wider area. They found Penfield's camera equipment in a crevice below the ridge, the wooden tripod broken, the glass plates shattered. They found a single bedroll, empty, frozen rigid. They found the canvas tarp tied between 2 trees, partially collapsed under the weight of ice. Beneath the tarp, they found William Sayre. His body was seated against a tree trunk, knees drawn to his chest. He wore all the clothing he had brought. His hands were bare. The gloves were in his pockets. The cause of death was listed as hypothermia, though no formal autopsy was conducted. He was buried in Landa on April 2, 1912. Thomas Ashford and Howard Penfield were never found. The assumption, supported by the evidence, is that they attempted to descend from the ridge during the storm and either fell or became disoriented and succumbed to the cold in terrain too rugged to search comprehensively. In the years that followed, occasional discoveries were made. A boot, likely Ashford's, was found in 1915 by a hunter. A tin cup and a box of matches turned up in 1921. Each item was reported to the sheriff's office, logged, and filed away. The family sought explanations. Ashford's wife wrote to the Wyoming Geological Survey demanding to know why the maps had shown a route described as accessible. The survey responded correctly that accessibility was seasonal. The maps carried no guarantee of safety in winter. Penfield's sister wrote to the Lander Hotel asking for his personal effects. The hotel returned his clothing and a box of undeveloped photographic plates. None of the plates showed images of the Wind River Range. They were blank. Sayre's business partner filed a lawsuit against Ashford's firm, claiming that negligence had led to his partner's death. The suit was dismissed. The judge noted that all three men had entered the mountains voluntarily, and that no evidence suggested coercion or misrepresentation. The question of blame lingered. Letters to the editor of the Lander newspaper debated whether Ashford was reckless or merely unfortunate, whether Crane should have refused to provide information rather than simply advising against the trip, whether the town had a responsibility to prevent departures it knew to be dangerous. But the record is clear. The men were warned. They understood the risks, or believed they did. They made a choice. That choice, in the end, was all that mattered. More than a century has passed since Thomas Ashford, Howard Penfield, and William Sayre rode north from Lander into the Wind River Range. The town has changed. The population has grown. The wooden sidewalks have been replaced with concrete. The Lander Hotel still stands, though it operates now as a museum. The ledger where Ashford signed his name is displayed in a glass case on the second floor, open to the page dated January 16th, 1912. The Wind River Range has not changed. The ridge where they died remains remote, accessible only to those willing to hike for days through country that offers no trails and no guarantees. Occasionally, someone finds a rusted piece of equipment or a fragment of cloth weathered beyond recognition. These items are turned over to the County Historical Society, catalogued and stored in a climate-controlled room alongside other remnants of the past. In 1978, a hiker discovered what appeared to be human remains in a ravine northwest of the Popo Agi drainage. The bones were transported to the State Forensic Laboratory in Cheyenne, where they were determined to be male, consistent with early 20th century clothing fragments found nearby. DNA analysis was not available. The remains were buried in Lander under a marker that reads, Unknown 1912. It is possible they belong to Ashford or Penfield. It is also possible they belong to someone else entirely, another man who misjudged the mountains and paid the same price. The historian researching this event is struck by how ordinary the story is. Three men made a decision that seemed to them reasonable. They were not reckless thrill seekers. They were professionals attempting to complete a task within a deadline. They assessed the risks and concluded the risks were manageable. They were wrong, but their error was not extraordinary. It was human. Overconfidence is not a character flaw unique to Ashford or Penfield or Sayre. It is a constant in human behavior, the belief that preparation and determination can overcome circumstance. Sometimes that belief is rewarded. Sometimes it is not. The archives contain hundreds of similar stories. Men who entered mines that collapsed. Men who climbed peaks in deteriorating weather. Men who crossed rivers at flood stage because waiting seemed worse than risking the current. The details vary. The pattern does not. What makes this particular story worth preserving is not that it is exceptional, but that it is representative. It shows how small decisions accumulate into irreversible outcomes. It shows how the same qualities that drive achievement, confidence, ambition, persistence, can, in the wrong context, drive catastrophe. Joseph Crane lived until 1931. In an interview conducted in 1929, he was asked if he remembered the three men who ignored his warning. He said he did. He was asked if he thought their deaths could have been prevented. He paused for a long time before answering. They could have waited, he said. They could have gone back, but they didn't. And once they didn't, there wasn't anything to be done. The interviewer pressed him. Could he have insisted more strongly, refused to provide information? Crane shook his head. A man has a right to make his own mistakes, he said. Even the last one. The final document in the file is a letter written by Ashford's widow in 1915. She had remarried and moved to California, but she wrote to the Wyoming Geological Survey asking if they had any further information about her first husband's fate. The response, polite and brief, said they did not. Her letter includes this passage. I have tried to understand why Thomas went into those mountains in January. He was not a foolish man. He knew the dangers. I think he believed that turning back would be a greater failure than moving forward. I think he believed he could will himself to succeed. I think in the end, that belief killed him. She was likely correct. The site Ashford was seeking, the copper deposit he believed would justify the expedition, was located in 1924 by a survey team working in summer. The deposit was real but small, not commercially viable. No mine was ever established. The location is marked on modern geological maps as Ashford Prospect, a name assigned by a geologist who read the old reports and thought it appropriate. It lies approximately 14 miles northwest of where Sayre's body was found, on a ridge above the tree line, in country still difficult to reach. Whether Ashford ever saw it is unknown. What is known is this. On the morning of January 19, 1912, 3 men stood on a ridge in the Wind River Range and faced a choice. Behind them was safety. Ahead was a goal they had traveled far to reach. The weather was turning. Retreat was still possible. They chose not to retreat. That choice, made in a moment that felt like determination, became the last significant decision of their lives. It was not made out of ignorance. It was not made out of malice. It was made out of the same impulse that drives much of human endeavor, the belief that willpower and planning can overcome obstacle. In this case, they could not. The mountains did not judge them. The cold did not care about their intentions. The storm did not pause for reconsideration. They refused to turn back, and that sealed it.